since we're a little bit after, let's go ahead and just get started because as we have found, these hours fly by real fast. So we're just going to dive in and go for it. So everyone, just so happy that you're here for the August Rewildology Book Club meeting. And as you all know, our book today, The Spirit of the Rainforest, which was such a wonderful read. As I said in my interview, I don't know if you all are tabbers like I am, but like I had so many tabs from all the notes that I took from your book. It's so, so good. But yeah, so just as a quick introduction, in case you haven't met me, I'm Brooke. I'm the creator and founder of Rewildology. And I don't know, conservation biologist. I've traveled all over the world, love telling conservation stories. You all know the show. So you know who I am. But I also like to introduce Katie, and then we'll just go over the rules really fast. But yeah, Katie is our book club moderator. She is an amazing science storyteller, conservation storyteller as well. And Katie, if you want to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into it.
So conservation communication is my jam. And of course, even more so being a connector. So connecting all of us together to be in this space to learn from each other. I love the saying, whatever is learned here leaves here, and whatever is like said here stays here. So we're going to kind of take that with us as we discuss Rosa's book.
Yeah. Awesome. So just some quick ground rules. I mean, this group is awesome, so I'm not going to belabor them. Just be nice and friendly. Like if you're going to ask controversial things, just be a little touchy about it. Like we don't need to get too political or anything. But if there is like a really deep question at your heart you want to ask, feel free. This is a time. This is a safe space for us, all of us, to do that. And how we want to do questions is so Katie will start today just to get us off and running. And then if you have a question, just use the little question hand thing. And we will call upon you. And if you don't want to ask it yourself, that is perfectly fine. Put it in the chat, and then Katie or I will ask it on your behalf. So either way, if you're like, no, I want the moment, I want to ask Rosa, feel free. But also, we want to make sure that no matter your comfort level, you have the opportunity to chat with Rosa. So with that, Rosa, hi. It's so amazing to have you here. Yeah, with that, Katie, you go ahead and you run with it, dear. You run the show, and I will.
Well, I have so many burning questions for you, Rosa. And of course, you answered so many with Brooke in the podcast, but I'm going to start out with a pretty big one. So when science and Indigenous knowledge give you different answers to the same question, how do you navigate that?
Oh, that's interesting. First of all, I'm so excited to be here, you guys. I love, I've only been able to, I think this is only my second book club that I get to join, and it just feels a bit surreal. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to read the book. And hopefully we'll have, more books to come for you. That is a deep question. And I think for me, I have so many examples on when they surprisingly do much more than people expected, because we had a case, for example, where, to identify these species, you typically look at taxonomic keys. So you literally look at like the specific shapes of the wings and the legs and whatnot. Unless you can do DNA, but it can be very costly and take more time. And in some instances, that's not really that good if you don't have any reference. And then with stingless bees, we noticed that it was not perhaps the most necessarily reliable method with morphology, because there are some minor differences, I think, based on the different ecosystems of the Amazon. And we noticed that the indigenous way of identifying them, which didn't necessarily fully rely on the body of the bee, but also on like the entry to their hive, was actually so powerful that it mimicked the entomological like analysis that an expert from Europe was doing. So I think I have a lot more examples like that when they kind of come together. I'm trying to think if I have one of when they disagree. Okay, one that comes to mind, and this is definitely not on the book, because it's like a new thing that we just saw this past trip just a month or so ago. We finally came across what people refer to as poisonous honey, and this toxic stingless bee, which there's been no records of in the literature, but I have heard about for the last like 6 years. And I have been on this like quiet search of the toxic bee and this toxic poisonous honey. Have you guys ever heard of poisonous honey before? Okay, there is a really cool video in CNN and a bunch of other media about a bear in the Himalayas that stole hallucinogenic honey. Basically, in that part of the world, the bees go to feed on nectar from something called the rhododendron flower that makes hallucinogenic nectar. And so then the honey that the bees make after eating that nectar ends up being also hallucinogenic. And it actually sells for really expensive prices. I've heard that it can go for like $1,000 for a small pot. Long story short, a bear decided to steal that honey and got like really high. And it was luckily it was fine. It was taken to the vet. The bear survived and it was all good. But parallel to that concept, basically, if there are plants that make toxic compounds, not necessarily hallucinogenic, then that honey can end up being poisonous. In San Diego, in the US, I came across some bees that feed on poison ivy. And so that honey ends up having these components from poison ivy, and it will, make you feel really sick. It won't kill you, but it won't be pleasant. And so the first time I heard that stingless bees not only made medicinal honey, but poisonous honey, I was like, wait, where can I get some of this? We have got to do analysis. Like, that's crazy. A lot of the most important medicines have come from poisonous or venomous things in our planet. But we finally came across one of these bees. And then we learned that the local people we were working with called it the toxic bee, because some claim that you get sick after consuming the honey, which is in agreement with what we think, we could be potentially finding. But then others, including one of my closely related Indigenous science partners that, has just published with us, and I have so much trust with him. He is convinced that the sickest he has been in his life when he was a teenager was when he saw the toxic bee. So he didn't consume the honey. He just happened to see it and spend time with it, not even get bitten by it or anything. So then I was like, I think in that sense, then my brain kind of starts to think, well, that's, what could be the premise for that? If you didn't consume the honey that we think could be, poisonous, or maybe didn't get bitten by the bee, which has some toxins in their saliva, or maybe he didn't realize it. But he's convinced it was just by seeing them, to the point that many people kill the hives of these toxic bee just because they think if they look at it long enough, somebody will die in the family. So I think in those cases, I am so conflicted, because I know that there are certain things that my family growing up claim, the time my cousin was the most sick as a child was because of this other spirit without necessarily a scientific explanation. And I grew up believing that too. So I don't really have an answer. I think I may just be rambling here. I think what ultimately I've noticed in instances where we think to have conflicts in theories is we just don't have the full picture. And then I think for a lot of indigenous or folkloric tales that perhaps, not all of that is going to be grounded on real measurable scientific evidence. When we look deeply, there is some sort of component of it that we can ground, and it can be kind of a clue to head to, something where we find these alignments. So yeah, my opinion is, at least how I rationalize that is, I take what my Indigenous partner is saying. He deeply believes just looking at the toxic bee is going to make him sick. But now we know also that some of these toxic bees could be potentially making poisonous honey. Could it have been that his ancestors consumed that honey, got so sick, that then they believe that just by being close to the toxic bee, then they're getting sick? And so in a way, it's not that he's wrong, it's based off of something that would make sense. So that is how I kind of go about it. But I just try to remember that we just don't know anything. We know just a fraction of things in the world.
That is science, isn't it? We know absolutely nothing. Just learn as we go. Absolutely. I also what I really love about your book, and what I think a lot of the people here might agree, is just spirituality and science are often treated as opposites, but your personal journey just challenged and kind of reshaped that idea. And I feel like that was really obvious in your book. And I just really loved reading about Pachamama and how this all of this connects to your story. So thank you for answering that question. Does anybody else have a question right now, right off the bat, or should I ask another one?
I have a question that might be slightly related to what you asked. Hi, Rosa. Nice to meet you. I'm halfway through your book. I just finished the ayahuasca chapter, and I did listen to the podcast with you and Brooke. But one of my questions, similarly to what Katie just asked, is like, you're trying to combine so many aspects, and you do it in such a beautiful way. And just by way of short background for myself, I interact with participatory science a lot, and with the tourism industry, and they help collect all of these samples that we have now, long time series in Antarctica, a place where now we have no research vessels going. So I experience a lot of this like disdain for fake science, and like then there's real science. And so I just wondered, for you, you seem to have a very deep well of confidence, personal confidence in yourself through your writing and through how you talk about things. So I was curious if you could speak on, like, at what point in your personal life or journey do you feel like you gained trusting yourself, that you knew what you're talking about, and you're mixing science and your Indigenous background and your personal experiences as a true way of seeing things and getting these answers? And then what do you say to people who are critics, or do you just ignore those people? Like, you're on a path and like, you're confident in how you approach the world.
I love your work, by the way. I'm really curious to learn more about what you're doing. It's great to hear that you've been involved in some of that participatory science. I thank you so much for saying that I come across as confident. I think for me, I don't necessarily even think of that, because I think everybody's always going to have like doubts, especially with like growing and navigating like new things. I basically started my own organization without any clue on how to do that. And everything we've been doing is learning as we go, without necessarily a master plan in mind, and just doing our best as we go and try to connect kind of backwards instead. I think more than the confidence is I just really believe everything that I am saying. I would die for what I'm believing, but not necessarily because I'm confident that that's the right thing. I think regardless of what other people are thinking, I just know that that is my own reality. And I think I'm comfortable with the idea that people may have different realities. Whether one is more true than the other, I think that's up for argument. But I think it's also me being so aware that the more confident we can seem in one topic, I think it sometimes can kind of like take us away from staying open-minded for other possibilities. So like, at least I think also it comes with a sense of justice for me though, because I am so aware that, for example, like my grandmother, it's only a few generations between her and me, really. It's my mom in between. My grandmother had never had the chance to, attend school and learn how to read and write and etc. But if you sit down with her extensively, she does have so much knowledge. And then yet, on this other side, people like her have always been kind of put aside, or their knowledge have not really been properly acknowledged. And even nowadays, when we see like these big, large conferences, and yes, more Indigenous people come in, a lot of that stays quite superficial and in the air, which I really struggle with as well, because I understand we need the representation. Absolutely. I'm just saying, how do you go from just talking to now landing it, which is quite rare actually still. So I feel like a weird sense of justice that consumes me, that I believe she is one of the smartest people I know, even though she doesn't have a degree. And so people may, I will give my own definitions to that. To me, she's still a scientist. And I know a lot of the internet disagrees with that based on the last post that I did that went a bit viral. And a lot of others do agree. And I think some agree in a way that takes it a bit in ways that perhaps I wouldn't. For example, there was somebody that said, the post I made about Indigenous wisdom and modern science, saying like, yeah, I also believe we can all be scientists, which is why I believe, nobody needs to force me to put a vaccine. Well, that's taking it in a different direction. Never did I mention anything about vaccines. I'm not going to enter that conversation, but I think people just see what they want to see in a way. And so, yeah, I think I'm just aware that everybody's going to give the explanation that they need. And I think instead of, I used to perhaps take it a lot more personal if somebody wasn't open to that idea, that why we cannot find this merge. And it used to upset me a lot more than it does now. And I think I noticed that too earlier this year when we did our first publication with our Indigenous partner, like he comes as first author. We have now two, but the first time, it happened only, I don't know, in March. And some of the first responses we got were criticisms from Peruvian scholars, more than the international audience. It was actually quite pleasant, at least to my face. Maybe in the back, not so much. But the Peruvian scholars, not all, but definitely some, were really critical. And I think I did got like a weird, of course, immediate reaction of like, come on, and the anger that I'm sure many people could feel. But then I immediately just pause and remember, we are entering a new phase. I still consider this merging of knowledges in science a new era, because we have barely few, handful examples. And I think I compare this to like the musical movement. So for example, Spanish music was so not common in like these major radio charts 10, 15 years ago. Right. And you had the few of the artists that started to kind of put it in there, but it was always just this big deal because it was uncommon. Now you have Spanish artists like Bad Bunny, like leading the charts, and people that speak no Spanish, like singing along. It's become so normal. It's normalized. Right. But it had to go through that stage. And those that are the early stages, unfortunately, are going to be facing a bunch of random stuff. But in a way, that is what it takes. So I think I've just kind of not resign myself. I'm just kind of like, you know what, if we want to be in this game, I understand we're in the early stage. If that's it, we just have to kind of proceed with that, whoever we piss off, because at least the people we're working with believe also in what we're doing. I do too. If a few others do, that's fantastic. If a few others don't, I think I'm starting to get more joy from realizing that we are pissing some people off, because I think ultimately if I was just to become like always with the negative feelings, this is a long ride and I need to either be comfortable with it or not. And I'm choosing to because I love it.
I love that. Thank you.
Well said. Does anyone have a follow-up question to that? Because I do, if no one else does.
I brought Bad Bunny into the conversation. I just think it as an example.
I love it. I love it. When we were driving through Peru, through Lima, I saw like a giant poster for Shakira. So I'm like, Shakira, but you know, it depends on what generation, right? You're in. But in your story, Rosa, you mentioned a publication of an ethno-ecological paper that kind of details the Ashanika knowledge of fauna. And I just loved how that the community was acknowledged as co-authors and part of this collaboration. How else, if you know, how else is that indigenous wisdom of the Amazon being preserved and being collected and shared? Is it just scientific publications, or are there other places where this knowledge is being collected?
I mean, like more the like front-based conservation, you could definitely see a lot more national, regional, international kind of conferences where they hold workshops and they hold, these meetings for knowledge sharing. How much is that being like, I don't know if we have measures as to how much that actually gets, shared afterwards or etc. But at least that's happening, and it's happening a bit more than it did before. Sometimes it seems like it's a lot more productive, and sometimes it feels like it's just checking a box. And I say that because I do know one of our Indigenous partners was the first time he was invited to a COP. He was told he was going to be given a chance to speak and make his case to protect, to advocate for his community and get more support. He had to travel all the way from Central Amazon to Dubai. So a major trip for somebody who has never done an international travel, right? He was not, his timing for speaking was basically canceled last minute. And all he, in his words, feels is that he was just taken around for photos and for very expensive meals, that he was not given money in advance for. He had to ask for reimbursement, which is absolutely ridiculous when we are talking about a vulnerable population that already won't have that money in savings, So I think I have a bit of a mixed feelings about this type of international forums, to be fully honest. I think so. That's on one side. On others, there are many groups, both Indigenous based and some, internationals and nationals, that are consistently working in capacity buildings and co-creation, and are, and touch on different topics. And I cannot speak for all of them, but at least a few I know are doing fantastic work. Some maybe more questionable, but there is at least a few kind of initiatives to either document women's perspectives or cultural practices in terms of like the botanical knowledge, which is kind of where my interest kind of comes a little bit more into. I have only seen a few examples that I feel like really happy for. And one of them was in the North Amazon that actually gave us a lot of inspiration. It's done with an international organization, and the founder has been living in Peru for ages. And they worked with one of the indigenous communities, the Matset people, to make a 2-part encyclopedia in their native language to document the botanical sources and the medicinal knowledge they wanted to keep, and maintaining it in their native language to avoid extractivism, avoiding including like specific maps. And I actually am, to this day, I'm still like amazed at that, because I think that's one of the most beautiful examples that I have seen, because I have also seen other cases where some other university comes and then makes 20 pages, some sort of mini encyclopedia, but it's only in English. It never gets translated to the local people. And actually the rest of the indigenous leadership are not even aware. And so, in that case, maybe they can claim that they are supporting the conservation of that knowledge, but is it really? I would disagree. So at least on our end, that's how we're working. But I do think there is so many efforts here and there. I know that now there's some groups trying to do it with AI, which I think quite interested. And I just hope that those that are engaging with it are really aware of like the ethical concerns. And at least the one group that I know, we're doing it in like a private database to avoid like the leaking. And, again, extractivism, which would be the best way to go. I'm not the most technologically driven person, so I'm sure there's a lot of things that I could be missing, but they were doing it to maintain a language, which I think would be key. So hopefully, we can see more of that done in specific ways and tailored to each of the community's needs.
That is really a beautiful answer. Again, just really diving into kind of just the different facets of how we can share information, but do it in a way that is respectful. I'm sure there's also a balance of what needs to be kept like sacred versus what can be shared out with everybody in the Western science space too.
Yeah, I think that just depends really on just kind of talking it out with with the communities. I think, and it sounds like such a simple antidote, but I have learned that it has not been the common practice. The common practice has been to assume before even entering what they need and what they don't need. And sometimes that can just happen to be aligned. In some instances, you may think that they don't want to share and they actually do. In some instances, you think they do want to share and they don't. And I think it's not up to even me as a native Peruvian, I think it's not up for me to decide, if we're working with one specific community, it's up for them to decide if it is regarding their own territory. So yeah, I just think that's been unfortunately the practice. And I think moving forward, that's like, at least from my perspective, why I'm the most excited to work with Indigenous youth, because if we just get a few kind of leaders with that mentality, that they can be empowered to make that decision making, or at least know how to pause people, because sometimes even the ones that are coming from outside, whether they're Peruvians or internationals, with this preconceived idea, it's not necessarily because they're mean or they're bad or they have bad intentions. Sometimes it's just ignorance, that they are not aware of. And sometimes you need that kind of standing up from the other side, saying like, look, I know the intentions are great and stuff, let's just do it this other way. And sometimes that just kind of will allow for a better collaboration. But there's such a big history of abuse and, lack of trust and walking on eggshells from both sides, but then doesn't really necessarily allow for the most productive conversation.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. I think the other thing you mentioned just now was a little bit about youth. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. You had such an incredible opportunity as a high schooler to get out into the Amazon, and I think you said in Brooke's interview that you were like studying animal behaviors, measuring water volume. Opportunities are huge for people because it opens up a lot of doors. What advice would you give maybe to some young people who might not have access to the rainforest, but still want to have those types of opportunities?
Oh God, I think there's so much we can do locally. And I work with a lot of schools and a lot of like educational teams. And we keep talking about it and I keep advocating, and I know many others are too. There is so much you can do locally. I think back in the day, we look at these magazines or movies about these exotic places, and we think we need to go there to do conservation and do something wild. But really, we kind of forget about the local change. And I have many examples of kids I've worked with that have led local change. There was this school in Idaho that we worked with already a few years ago with a Nat Geo educator. And originally it was for them to learn about my work in the Amazon and find inspiration to get into science. But we first decided to connect it with their nearest, most exotic ecosystem, which was Yellowstone. Not the closest, but it was maybe 4 hours away. So anyways, that was really cool. They got excited. But again, that's still 4 hours away. Not all the kids are going to have the chance to pay for a bus and to go and, make sure that the parents are joining. And so, but then with the school, we basically kind of asked the kids, what do you have around? And then they say, oh, well, we have this garden, of course, at the school. We have this river, 10 minutes walking that a lot of the families are interacting with because they live nearby. So then the question is, what can you do with your river? What would you want to see? And then just by kind of allowing them to put the eyes on this other side and then saying, it is cool too to do the work on your own space. And then they dove into what became like a semester-long project to notice that the river was being contaminated by plastic, that they wanted to do something about it. They reached out to a bunch of experts, from botany to like fish experts, ecology, journalism, blah, blah. They ended up kind of creating short podcasts on these different expert topics based on the interviews they had held with the professionals, uploading those to YouTube. And then they had made a song to advocate to not throw plastic into the river. They could have stopped there, right? That's already a really cool project. I'm sure they showed their parents, their school community. They got a great grade. That's it. But a subset of those students basically were unsatisfied by that. And then they went to the teacher and said, we have been learning about examples from other groups, me and a few others, that within their spaces, they're like doing more, and then they said, what can we do so that the rest of the town, can care about this? And then the teacher just suggested city council. And then they were like, well, we want to go to city council. These were 10 years old, okay? Tiny babies. And they went to city council and then they presented about everything that they had been doing. They got approval to put signages along the rivers with QR codes to the videos, and then they got the funding for it. So to this day, if you go to the Teton River in Idaho, you can find that. I mean, talk about, these 10 years old. I hope that at least one or two of them will become these like really transformational leaders that will focus about their surroundings first. And that's what we need more of now,
Absolutely. Aren't youth so inspiring? It's so cool.
It's just surreal to me. I think it's so cool. Like I wasn't doing that at 10, but I think there's something about the brain. It keeps, getting more, I don't know, we keep getting smarter. It's a bit scary, but at the same time, it can be used for good,
And I love that they have put together songs and dances about what they're doing too. It's like the creativity element, which I know you also spoke about in your book, is like creativity and science and those things merging together. I love to see it.
That's children. And I think even that's cool. The reason why they wanted to pair with me in that moment was because the girls were having difficulty engaging with the sciences. And by the end of the program, we learned it wasn't that the girls were having difficulties engaging with the science. They were just not being invited in the way that was true to them. So, for example, for some of them, the moment they were given the freedom to choose to approach their local ecosystem through art or through journalism or through painting and music, to be able to recreate those art creative outputs, they needed to learn about the plants and the botany and the animals and etc. And suddenly they were just given the freedom to approach it. And then many of them ended up saying, oh, I want to learn how to use the microscope now. That's cool, you know. Sometimes that's all you need instead of just being forced down to something. So yeah.
And look at everybody in this call today. I mean, we're all here because we're chasing our curiosities too. And someone invited us to participate in science in one way or another, or just invited us to come and read books. I want to give a little bit space again in case anyone else wanted to ask a question. I know I am chatty. Brooke and I like to talk. So Michelle, go right ahead.
Hello, nice to meet you, Rosa. I absolutely enjoyed the book. Every chapter is just a beautiful story. So thank you for sharing all those stories with us. But I'm curious, what's next? Are you currently working on a particular research project, or are you traveling? How often do you get in the field?
Thank you so much. That's very, very kind. God, I wanted to start writing a second idea, but I've had to put it on hold because we've been quite busy. We did launch a new science project in this last trip. I don't know if you finished reading the book, but I think it was chapter 10 or 11, maybe it was 11, where I talk about an ayahuasca experience where I experienced like life as a jaguar for like a hot minute. But that actually, since that experience, over the last 2 years, we've been quietly kind of designing a new research project, which we just launched about a month or so ago. So really exciting. And it's basically to do the first study in the Amazon, how animals self-medicate. And this is going to be kind of like long-term because there's been no studies done before. We have some clues based on traditional knowledge conversations and our Indigenous partners. And I can give you some of the confidential advances in a minute, but that's going to be something that will slowly be kind of adding into the repertoire. So it's just kind of getting everything off the ground, pyramid-wise, kind of what the data collection long-term will look like, because I think the whole idea, that's with an international partner as well, but the whole idea is how do we involve, always Indigenous people in the work. And I think with the Stingless bee work that we've done, that we continue to, at least there is a model on how things can happen, which then at least it is my vision to be able to translate that into any other project. So that has been one. We are working on the Rights of Nature Declaration for Stingless bees, which is going to be quite a major effort to finally launch. It's the first time that the rights of bees will be recognized as sentient beings. And then I've had quite a lot of commitments for like consultancy work. Traveling, I just came back. I was last week in LA doing some fun recordings for some animal conservation that hopefully will be out soon. And then I went to Riyadh for the first time in Saudi to talk with some schools. And I have a few other trips like that. But I do want to find time again next year to kind of put my head down and start thinking of a book number 2. Basically, with my organization, we have kind of like these ongoing research projects. We've really solidified our local teams. So we have expeditions kind of happening constantly. A lot of them are now happening without me as well, which was always the plan, so that they can continue kind of that leadership. So me also just strategizing, with resources as well, when I'm joining, when we can do like that big push, and then also balancing like me and working, to make a living. But yeah, I would say that in terms of that research project, we kind of basically to look at how animals may self-medicate. You first need to know what animals you have around that you can easily track, and that you have any clues about what they could be eating or pooping, so that you can collect that and then look at that. And we had some clues of tapirs consuming Stingless bee honey and consuming certain leaves, as well as a few other monkeys. So anyways, we're always just kind of thinking of cool, exciting projects, but trying to focus it so, we can only do so much.
Well, I'll chime in on that one. One, absolutely amazing. Like so cool. And Rosa, I just wanted to tell you that Michelle is the amazing editor who's been making all the really fun videos that,
Oh my God,
you've been seeing online.
awesome. The videos have been like so insanely amazing. I've been
Yeah.
in awe.
Thank you for all the amazing footage, and please keep documenting whenever you can. Because it's so important to get it out there visually too. I'm a book person now, so I'm happy to have a book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the way you guys have put that content out, absolutely amazing. I really loved it.
We still have a couple videos planned that are going to be posted next week. One about zoopharmacognosy, which I got it. I can say it now.
And what an amazing discovery. Like, I'm sure that there's been hints of it with certain animals along the way of history, but to hear about even more and more and more animals that you don't think maybe have that thought process.
I think this field is going to grow so much. So this project, we're leading it with a scientist. Her name is Elodie Freeman. I'll write it down here. Actually, I'll reach out to you, Brooke, if there's any way to give her a shout out in the, sorry, maybe it's double N. She has had incredible kind of work documenting how chimps self-medicate in Africa. It's been all over the news quite recently. But I do think, I believe it is really in most, if not all, animal groups. And I just think it also kind of speaks to a way that animals communicate that we just have had no clue about. The same way that up until not so long, we didn't know that trees could communicate through fungal networks undergrounds, and how sometimes even if you cut down a tree, it could not necessarily be dead because it's going to be connected underground. And that has, revolutionized thinking about trees and whatnot. I really think that the way that animals communicate with the floral world is something we just have not explored. And I think there's way more than we realize. Even looking, there's an amazing book. I'm forgetting the name, but it became really big in the US, that talks about how animals perceive the world. And it goes into incredible examples on the sensitivity of course, dogs to smell, but even how some snakes can feel chemically and physically. Ed Young is the author. I will highly recommend it. Ed Young.
I have that book. I haven't read it yet. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, an immense world. It's a bit long, but there it is. But I do think that's kind of like that in a way made me start to think about, okay, there's so much we don't know. And then I think there's that kind of some sort of like chemical recognition that happens. And there is a really cool study. I don't know if I mentioned it, Brooke, in our call or not, but there was this science paper that basically showed how Neanderthals, so now not even talking about Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, they have found fossils of their teeth, and there were some tooth teeth that had bacterial infection, like the residues of a bacterial infection that would have caused a lot of tooth pain. And those same teeth had residues of salicylic acid, which is the active component of aspirin that you find in certain leaves. So it was so joined together that statistically, from all the things that they had analyzed, it was no by chance. Basically, whenever they had tooth pain, they were chewing on a specific leaf that had the active component of aspirin. How in heaven do you explain that? Did people just went around and chew every leaf until the pain went away? Or could have they observe an animal and then at least be able to prioritize what leads to start this testing process with? To me, that's kind of what makes a lot of sense. And there was another study that came out, I think this year, really in depth and really thorough as well, analyzing thousands of people, that we also can smell fear in others, even if we're not aware of it. And basically they had, I think, made a group of people jump off an airplane, like, those type of things that people do, and then take those t-shirts and basically ask another completely unrelated group of people, again, with thousands of people, saying, smell these shirts and just mark if you think this person is afraid or not. Completely random. And statistically, basically, it was like 95, 97% chances that the ones that were marked as, yes, this person I think is afraid, were the ones that had jumped off the airplane. I mean, that just blew my mind, because could it just be that we also have this really like incredible way of sensing that we're just not aware of, similar to how animals can sense these medicinal components? And it makes sense because we ultimately all come, from like, we are all kind of connected evolutionarily, and perhaps we have just lost those senses now living in concrete, jungles.
Yeah, I think that is so cool. There's so many questions that come from everything. It's like, oh, why haven't we explored this before? Why this is so cool.
Yeah, and to be honest, in that book, Ed Young, it kind of makes like, I don't remember if it was actually in that book specifically, if I read it afterwards, but basically a few kind of scholars or people have said, I think, could it be that we just feel threatened by the idea that we could not have the most dominating senses because we have the advanced cognitive function, and we think that that overpowers every other potential way of sensing and relaying and receiving information and analyzing it, whether that's chemically or, through the process of thinking? Do we think that our language, oral and thinking, are more powerful? And I think in a way that kind of makes sense. It's just the human, population always thinks we're the most dominating, otherwise our existence is threatened. So yeah, I just hope that at least we're kind of leaning at least some part of our generation to at least be open to the idea. It's not, is that the full picture, or could there be other stuff? What can we learn? It doesn't need to threaten our egos or our existence. It just means we could be like better off actually by understanding.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to still uncover and discover, which is so exciting. And I feel like your book just really dives into a lot of things I've never thought of or considered. And it just opens a lot more questions. And I'm excited to hear more about the research that you're going to continue to do and what kinds of things will be learned from that. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think there's only been a few examples of books kind of that are openly talking about these two ways of thinking, right? Of course, Braden Sweetgrass, I think, is such a big inspiration, definitely for me, definitely for others. But I had not realized how little of literature we have about that in a way that is accessible, that is fun, that is relatable, so we stop putting things so far away from us that we cannot like feel connected or can learn from those things. So yeah, I'm really excited, and I love the process of writing so much as well. But of course, I love science too, so I know we're gonna continue with like the projects, but I definitely want to give myself more time to start thinking of putting more content out there in books and others to keep exploring this topic. It's clearly we are taught, get into sensitive topics. Some people perhaps on the internet could get uncomfortable with these ideas, but that makes me even more excited to explore them further, because I do think it won't be such a rare thing in 10 years. I believe deeply,
Yeah, I think the way that we look at science is going to just continue to change and open up a lot of doors. I also appreciate you name dropping a couple of books, since everyone here is a little bit of a bookworm. And I did spy on your shelf when you were talking with Brooke that you had The Covenant of Water, which is another really awesome book. Are there any other books, Rosa, that you might recommend to everyone here?
I guess I'll be curious to hear what you guys all read. I love nonfiction whenever my brain needs to be like stimulated, and I love when people do like deep research. And I'll suggest another one that I just finished reading. But then whenever I need to just relax my brain, I love to read short fiction. I adore just short romantic stories. And I'm not in my house right now, but I'm so bad with names, but this is the one that I just finished reading. It's nonfiction, and I found it completely transformational. The Body Keeps the Score by
I'm listening to
Right.
that right now on audiobook. That is nuts.
Really?
Literally, that's when I was getting
Oh
ready
my
today.
gosh.
I have it on audiobook and I'm listening to it. It is amazing. Holy
It is such a good book, such in-depth research, and it just made me think. It talks basically about how the body keeps trauma, but it goes so much farther than that. And I think it kind of explores even like the brain and the emotional system from a child to like older, but then also how that transpires into the educational, the financial system. Um, yeah, I thought it was really good, and it just kind of made me think as well. I kind of ultimately also kind of keep connecting everything to what you said. You know, some people kind of didn't to knowledge systems. Why are some people so affected by that? You know, why are we so like some people are so rejectful of that? What trauma is it? Not necessarily at the individual level as well, but like in a community or societal level. You know, I think even just learning about like intergenerational trauma, I think is so important, and like the biological changes that that has in a human person, like at the epigenetic level versus the social level. I do think whether I want it or not, there's something that there relates to why, as a society, we've rejected traditional knowledge so much in our modern times. So I'm really curious about that. There's another one, but this was I don't remember the name here. I think. I think this one. Maybe you guys have read it as well. This is more kind of philosophical. But I think it was really good for me to remember it as well, especially as I knew putting out there like the book, but also just being a bit more outspoken about like my own thoughts. I think it's definitely been quite helpful too. If you have never come across with it, I know it sold a lot of copies, but I was really fascinated by the it's just a conversation. The entire book is literally a philosopher and a young person, and it's just a conversation. And then it just touches on philosophy about that basically goes a bit against of what we typically think, why people react to things, and it just provides an alternative. I think it's a Japanese type of philosophy, but I just thought it was really beautiful. And it kind of, in a way, made me think of something, I don't know if necessarily for book two, but like in the future, part of the indigenous knowledge and wisdom is that every life form out there, animal, plant, ecosystem wise, has a spirit. And there's many ways as to how that happens. There's some indigenous cultures, that have, like in the book at the beginning, that explain that because in their vision at the beginning of the world creation, everything was a spirit, a human-like spirit. So then everything was turned into a plant, into an animal, into a mountain. And so that is how they explain that now those life forms have a spirit. There are some others that kind of come to it in different ways, but ultimately every life form has a spirit. And in a way, there's kind of that, the nuances of what that looks like is there's, for example, a bird that we call the pija in the jungle that has a very particular singing as if it's whistling. And it only basically sings during the day, and it is believed that it sings to welcome you. So it will only sing when there are people coming around. And so it's basically telling you, keep walking, keep coming, you're welcome. And so whenever the locals are walking and that bird happens to be singing, they kind of say hi back. So it's almost very conversational in a way, based on this belief that, the natural world is filled with spirits. So I think reading that book, The Courage to Be Disliked, and just how easy just by a single conversation, and a few others that I remember right now, not remembering, but it just kind of made me think, could it be easier to explain that perspective of the world, the indigenous worldviews, by just a simple conversations that people inherently, one way or another, like in indigenous territories, are holding with the rivers or the fish or the trees, but just materializing that in a way that just, kind of helps get a window into that world. Because I've noticed even myself kind of do that whenever even I'm not in Peru and I've had, I don't know, kind of difficult times, or I've been in moments where I find a lot of solace in that type of thinking that I grew up with, but that I'm not necessarily next to all the time now. And so I find a lot of solace in like just thinking that the trees are moving and we're having a conversation. And so anyways, I just think that at some point that could be a really cool idea for a book too.
Go ahead, Mathilda, and ask your question.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for being here, Rosa. I haven't finished the book just yet, so maybe you talk about it later on. But I'm a very early career researcher in mathematical ecology, and I'm just noticing that I'm sort of leaning towards topics which are not as well delved into yet in like the research, and I'm not taking it seriously. So I was wondering, how do you deal with it, or how would you suggest for someone who is like a first year PhD student to sort of go into these topics and get your supervisor to, you know, believe that it's a real topic and not just something that some weirdos in the internet believe in?
That's cool, by the way. Mathematical ecology. That sounds really, really interesting and really hard too. Kudos. I mean, when I started my PhD, I remember talking with my advisor before I even joined and after I joined that the only reason why I was doing a PhD and going back to school, because I took a year off, was to be able to work in the Peruvian Amazon so I could start bringing that knowledge back. And as soon as I, got already into the university and stuff, he had a real honest conversation with me and he said, look, it will all depend on funding and you just are not trained yet. I'm going to put you in projects that will ensure that you get a thesis and you get papers and you like learn the skills and get established. And when I think, you can be starting to lead on your own, if you are able to get that funding, then you can start adding that onto your projects. And I think at the beginning, I felt a bit like betrayed by that because I was like, well, you said I would be able to, and then why not going ahead, blah, blah, blah. And I think I held on to that for a little bit. And it was only until my third year that I could start working on my work in Peru and was able to get small bits of funding. And then that just really propelled everything. So I guess I would just have a chat with him, and then see. And then even if he was to, by any chance, not be fully supportive of that, it doesn't really take away of the fact that you can still explore that. And like, the fact that you are already in a PhD means you can navigate the literature and you do have the skills to put a science project together and explore it independently as well. So I think sometimes when we're gonna go back to a PhD, we feel like, we're these like teeny tiny mentees under the big mentors, when in reality, no, you are already in like the 1% of the world population to have had the experience to enter even a PhD. A lot of people are doing insane research without having a PhD. So you do have everything that you need. So I will just say that. So even if it's not fully, supportive, effort, and then, find the time to still do it. And if he is in any way, then find a way to make it work, because I think in some way, a lot of academic places are just going to depend on funding. So maybe you guys can think of a creative way that it doesn't impact negatively. It gives him what he wants, which is probably going to be papers. And it still allows you to kind of explore the things you have that personal interest in.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, keep me posted. That's really cool. Let me know if I can help with anything else along the way, because it's not going to be the easiest journey. Just send me a message.
We have just a few minutes left, so we're just going to go ahead and wrap up our conversation here so that everyone can get on with the rest of their day. But I just want to say thank you again so much, Rosa, for once again spending time with the Rewildology community. I mean, your story, it is amazing. You've taught us so much about the Amazon and to chase our curiosity and asking more questions, to be inspired by Indigenous knowledge. And I just love one of the last sentences in your book, which is, to live beautifully is to reconnect is to love, and to love is to protect our Pachamama. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. That's very kind. Yeah, I definitely had a bit of a conversation with Brooke at the end of our podcast on just the simple notion that we often forget about, especially, I think as females entering kind of like conservation or science or like higher education, we just feel like we have to prove so much all the time. I get it. But it is just so easy to forget about the simple joys of life, and that can just be the best thing we do to ourselves at some point, for creativity as well, and for productivity. And I remind myself of this constantly. It's not like this magical bubble in which I wish I could stay all the time, but that's just life, so that is kind of like the beauty of constantly chasing that idea, I think, for me.
And I will go ahead and chime in. And Rosa, I've told so many people about you, and I'm like, she is like one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. And
Oh,
I'm so
you.
excited to keep collaborating with you. I know that we have a couple more calls in the future, so there might be some really exciting things that happen, everyone. And just keep up to date on online on those cool videos that Michelle and I are making, and everything Rosa's doing and everything. But I also want to take the time to announce our next book while you all are here. It's a pretty big one, so I'm very excited about this. So it's Crossings by Ben Goldfarb. So he is a pretty famous author who also wrote Eager about beavers, which is a very, very, very good book. And Ben is excited to meet with us in October to chat with all of us directly. So it should be a fantastic time. He's a pretty famous journalist. So this will also a total change of pace from past books. If you haven't heard of this book, it's how road ecology is shaping the future of our planet. So it's a very important topic. I'm sure one that Rosa is very intimate in with road development in the Amazon, since that is a big part too. I haven't even gotten into it yet. Literally, I overnighted this to make sure we had it for today's conversation, since it was just locked in. But we'll get a date out to all of you soon. And with that, I am happy to wrap up the August Rewildology Book Club meeting. And I thank all of you so much. And of course, the most thanks to our star of the hour, Rosa. And thank you, Katie, for leading this beautiful meeting today. And I hope that everybody has a fantastic weekend. I enjoyed every minute.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Brooke and Katie, and all of you guys for joining as well. I send you big hugs.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you for hosting. Nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.